Hello, and welcome to another episode of Truth Wanted. I'm your host, ObjectivelyDan, and joining me today is my very, very, very good friend, Thomas Westbrook, also known as HolyKoolaid. Thomas, what's going on, man?
Not much. I just drove down here from Tulsa, and I'm going to be in Austin for a little bit, but traffic, man.
Yeah.
In Dallas, I had to go all the way around Fort Worth just because there was like a 30-minute delay. So
let me tell this story real quick because this is really funny. We were planning on having Thomas on for a while, and I knew he was coming down today all the way from Tulsa, and I get this message from him saying, hey, it looks like I might be a bit late. My ETA is like, 6:10 or something?
I've never seen Google give that big of a delay.
But he said, I'm going to book it. I'm going to keep trying. And then he keeps getting me updates. He's like, all right, it says 6 o'clock now. All right, 5:55, 5:50. And like right at 5:50, you came on in and we got set up here in the studio.
I hope you feel special because I never take toll roads. I don't like them just sending me stuff in the mail that I forget about and then I get late fees on. But I took 5 toll roads for you.
5 toll roads for this show. God bless.
Because Google kept saying, there's a faster route that's a minute faster, but it's a toll road right here in Austin.
Yeah.
I'd do one toll road onto another one. And
this man is a saint.
Yeah.
I mean, I really appreciate that, dude. Like,
I must really want truth.
Yeah, that's right. These great, awesome mugs that we're drinking down here for those of you listening
that are available for purchase.
Not yet, but man.
Plugging your merchandise before the...
That would be cool. We're working on getting some business cards printed pretty soon, so that's exciting if you get one of those. So, Thomas, I mean, I've known you for probably over a year now. We first met... no, actually, it hasn't been a year. Was it Faithless Forum? That was earlier this year.
Faithless
so it hasn't
Forum
quite
Conference.
been, but it was close to a year now.
Yeah.
And that's when we first met. And like I had actually seen your stuff before. And
to the viewers who don't know, Faithless Forum was a conference put together entirely by atheist YouTubers, the first conference of its type. And so you drove all the way up to that. I think you were from Waco.
Yeah, I was
driving
in Waco. And
so you came all that way just to see us throw together this conference. I think it turned out really well. It was a really positive feedback.
It was super, super cool. So those of you who've seen Genetically Modified Skeptic been on here before, he was one of the organizers for that conference as well. And it was just a super awesome time. And we at first talked about stuff, and then we also saw each other again at the American Atheist Conference and stuff. And we've been talking and hanging out since. I've been on your YouTube channel like once. I was in the compilation for your Flat Earth responses, and that was really cool. So like you've done a lot of stuff. I mean, you're on YouTube, you have your podcast now as well. You want to talk about some of the stuff you're doing?
So my biggest thing for people who aren't aware is HolyKoolaid. I put together these videos I try to keep them around 5 to 10 minutes, laser focused, and I'll debunk pseudoscience. I'll go after all kinds of paranormal woo, whether it's psychics or young earth creationists or people like David Avocado Wolf who encourage you to avoid cancer treatments but to get a urine vaccine instead. And yes, you did hear that right. That was a urine vaccine.
Yeah, I've heard this. It's really wild.
There's some really harmful ideas out there. There's some really dangerous ideologies, and there's a lot of people that are hurt by stuff like this. And so I want to know, is there any merit to this? Is there any truth to this? And then how can we find out? So really similar to what you're doing, but mine is much more didactic and less epistemology.
Yeah. I mean, you have a channel where you cover all kinds of stuff, and not just like pseudoscience, but like religious topics too. I mean, you run the whole gambit. I've seen your channel. You put a lot of effort into your animations and stuff, which is really cool. Which you all do like by yourself. You're a one-man show, which I think is really awesome.
Well, on my podcast, I team up. I've got another YouTuber, Rationality Rules, also known as Stephen Woodford, and Rachel Oates are my 2 co-hosts, and we'll just dive into big ideas. That's much more like we'll take a big idea like, will robots replace us? Or, can we ever, extend human lifespan and live forever? And we'll just expand out, over like an hour long. We'll do some research and just explore topics and look at the future of this stuff.
Yeah, it's super, super interesting. Well, I'm really glad you got to be on my show today,
it's a pleasure.
I've been wanting you to get on since like the very beginning, and we've been talking about it. Now you're finally here. So let's just go ahead and just jump right into the calls. Are you ready?
I was born ready.
All right. That's cool. All right. So this first call is very special because I kind of arranged this call beforehand. We're going to talk to a guy named Sean. And Sean has his own show where he talks about conspiracy theories, and we agreed to talk about some 9/11 conspiracy theories today. Sean, you're on the air right now, man. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Okay. So Yeah, you want to talk a little bit about your show and stuff? Because I think that that's really interesting.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I host a conspiracy theory show called Conspiracy Theories and Chill. I stream it live from Facebook, but I also post it to YouTube. We talk about, I'll make a video each episode and about a specific conspiracy, but then afterwards we'll hang out for about an hour and just talk about anything I get in the comments. I'll just kind of wing it. It's always a live show. So I'm pretty well versed in most conspiracies, and we just hang out and have a good time.
Now, are these conspiracies that that you adhere to, believe in? Some you do, some you don't, or are you debunking? Like, what's kind of the flavor of the show?
Well, some I believe in, and some I don't. There's not a whole lot of debunking that goes on. I mean, I might get into things that I downright disagree with, but I don't as far as do debunking videos. But I'll do any request. I'm really into conspiracy, so anytime a viewer will ask me to cover a topic, I'll go into it and look at it from a impartial viewpoint, just for that viewer. So I have no problems exploring different topics that I might not agree with.
Awesome. And that's a really good attitude to have. And that's why we brought you here on the show, because I had heard some from other podcasters and stuff that you had been on their shows and you've been talking about this stuff. And I think it's something that's great for Truth Wanted. I definitely, from the beginning, have wanted to be more inclusive to all kinds of beliefs and ideas, conspiracy theories included, whether you actually believe in them or not. And you are our first official conspiracy theory person to have on the show, as far as I know right now. So I'm glad that we get to talk about it. So I think before we were talking about 9/11 truth stuff, but if there's another conspiracy theory that you like genuinely believe in, like that's what I want to hear about. Just anything we can talk about on here.
The one that I would be the most positive about would be 9/11.
Okay.
But I also firmly believe that, for example, that we've never been to the moon.
Ooh, gosh. Okay, so those are two enticing things to me to talk about.
That's two entire episodes just to tackle.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you say that you're a 9/11 truther, what aspects? Because I've heard different people's takes on different things. I've heard some people say that it was the entire thing was a U.S. government orchestration. I've heard people say that the U.S. government knew about it, but they let it happen, but it was still Saudi hijackers. I'm curious kind of where you fall.
Well, where I fall is I believe that 9/11 was an orchestrated event carried out by the United States and Israel. I believe the CIA and the Mossad worked together to carry out 9/11. As far as our government's involvement, I feel like there was involvement in the highest tiers. I believe that Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and President George Bush would have had to have been involved, or at least in the know. So, but as far as the rest of the government and people thinking that the government pulled it off, I don't think that. I believe that we had a part in it, though.
Okay. Yeah, so I know, because you host this show, you've probably done a lot of research on this particular topic. And I know that there's probably a lot of reasons that have led you to the conclusion that you do. If we can, I'd like to just discuss like your biggest, I guess we could say evidence, I guess your biggest reason for your confidence in this belief. And I'd love to just talk about that.
The thing that was the biggest smoking gun of the whole event to me was the collapse of Building 7. It didn't seem right to me. Something seemed wrong with it. And the more I looked at 7, the more I had doubt that a building could collapse like that due to office fires, which made me doubt the whole story, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
If there was a similar building that collapsed like that from office fires, would that change your mind?
That collapsed it like in that particular fashion, it might. I mean, I would be interested in seeing it.
Okay. So if there was a building in, let's say, Iran a few years back, that it was a steel-framed building that caught fire and collapsed in a similar fashion, that if I told you that happened, would that alter the belief, or maybe we kind of make you reconsider, or?
Well, the belief is pretty strong, so It would take more than that. It would take more than seeing one more example of a building in Tehran. I don't even know much about the building. If they're comparable, then it would cause a chink in the armor for sure. But
Okay.
there's a lot more that I have problems with about 9/11. It just started with 7, and that's the one I'm the most disturbed about is the collapse of Building 7.
So if we could put your confidence in this belief being true on a scale from like 0 to 100, 0 being absolutely zero confidence, 100 being, yes, this is totally real and nothing could change my mind, what do you think you could label your confidence at?
Well, I wouldn't want to go so far on the spectrum to be where I wouldn't change my mind. So I'd throw it at 80.
80%. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's fair.
So what we kind of like to do on this show is we're not necessarily trying to tell you whether we think your belief is correct or not correct. I have a bunch of different guest hosts that believe in a bunch of different things. What we're more interested in is the methods of how you came to this belief, and if you're willing to change your mind based on, different kinds of priors. So, for example, some people really value the scientific method. If they saw something through the scientific method that would, change their way of how they think science works, then they would change their confidence about their belief, for example. And so that's why we're kind of asking, okay, so like what are some of the big, heavy-hitting reasons that we can kind of talk about so we can understand, okay, if there's another way we can spin this, or if there's another way we can show you that this may not be the case, or if somebody could demonstrate to you some form of evidence or otherwise that could change your mind about something, we'd be interested in kind of knowing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
You're a lot better at this than I am. I dive straight into, what about this? What about, I tend to be...
here's what I think. I think human psychology doesn't really gravitate towards, like, if you show somebody, like, scientific evidence for something...
backfire effect.
You get the backfire effect, right? You get this this thing that happens to people where they actually double down on their beliefs rather than, change their mind about things. And some people, like, don't value science as much as, like, somebody you or I would. So, like, showing them a journal from a scientific study, that might not mean anything to them. So you have to work with people's values and how they, got there, and if those are good values, or even if that's even a coherent concept, because that goes into a whole other thing. But so anyways, back to this conversation, Sean. So I know that you probably, like we were talking about, have a whole bunch of research on this topic. Do you think that there's other reasons that we could talk about, maybe, of why you hold this belief to be true? Because you also mentioned a whole bunch of other stuff, like different people were involved and things like that. So I think there's other reasons that are convincing you of this, right?
Oh, well, yeah. This has been a long-held belief. I didn't believe it at first. At first, I was just like any other American, went to be extremely patriotic, listened to NPR every day, watched CNN, watched all of the official coverage I could get of the event. It's just something always seemed off about it. And the more I dug into it, the more that seemed off about it. And at a certain point, I became convinced.
So, man, how do you want to tackle this, Thomas? Is there any questions you want to ask?
So I'm kind of curious as to, so you've heard different presentations put forth. When you hear a new piece of information, what type of sources are you normally what are your kind of your go-to when you're researching this? I'm kind of curious.
I like to use as much actual coverage that I can use to look into. I like to use accepted sources. Am I making sense? Mainstream sources for my my research. Like, I wouldn't use some of the deeper stuff like on YouTube where it's just a guy sitting in front of a screen like me, breaking it down. I would want to find out from more of a scientific viewpoint, like engineers and architects and engineers from 9/11 Truth. That was a video that really struck home with me, and it was just all experts in architecture and engineering talking about the event. So things like that. I'm saying I'm a lot.
Was the video? I've seen a few different videos similar to that. Was this video created by the architects and the engineers, or was it something that it was like someone took footage and took quotes and stuff of engineers and compiled it together?
You're talking about. It's all chopped up and changed, but no, I ordered mine. I got mine through the mail. I ordered it from the source. So the version that I would have put stake in actually came from the publishers of the video. I'm not talking about viewing it off of YouTube, but I see what you mean. It's been edited and doctored 100 times.
Yeah. Well, what I'm asking more is, like if it's a group of engineers that are getting together and sharing their story and their, why they're doubtful, versus something that's, hey, these engineers said these comments that seem a little suspect when taken out of context.
Oh, no. In this particular video, they are clearly talking about the event. It's not them saying something that you could twist. This particular video, they are talking about the event. Now, I did not look into the individual engineers, but there are thousands of them that have signed off on this petition.
What is the
Anyways,
petition
that was just
exactly?
one example of a source that I would use, something where there's people in that particular field whose opinion I can trust, because I'm not an architect.
Okay.
But I would listen to someone that is. And, in this video, for example, just this one particular example, there's multiple architects and engineers talking about this. And I found that interesting. That was something that helped me come to a conclusion.
Now, I just want clarification for details. Do you think, maybe you said it earlier and I actually missed it, do you think this was a controlled demolition, or do you think this was something else?
I think it was a controlled demolition.
Okay.
All 3 buildings.
Okay, cool. So have you ever heard any statements from any people who were like, so because like you mentioned the science aspect of it, which I think is really interesting. I think you could make a case of whether or not the events that we saw like could have happened scientifically or not, were they physically possible. But the other aspect of this explanation for the events is also like people involved. So like you mentioned a couple of different names there, like Dick Cheney and other people who were kind of like responsible for these things. Can I ask you, what is it about these specific people that caused you to believe that, first of all, they would want to do an event like this, but also that they were even involved?
Absolutely. So we'll use Dick Cheney, for example. Dick Cheney, well, let me backpedal a little bit. We'll have to combine Donald Rumsfeld in here, too.
And we don't need a super detailed explanation also, by the way. We just want to get like a basic rundown of like what the events are. I'm not looking for the most detailed explanation in the world for this point.
No, I was going to try to broad stroke it for you.
Okay, great, awesome.
So the shoot-down order for planes was changed to where you had to contact the Secretary of Defense. Donald Rumsfeld was MIA during the events of 9/11. It's weird that order was changed and then changed back afterwards because you could argue that they realized that it didn't work and they had to change it back. But it's weird that it was changed for that event. And the other side of it for Dick Cheney is his connections to Halliburton and how much money they made off of the entire event and our activities in the Middle East since the event.
Okay.
So that's what made me think of them 2 people.
So like a financial incentive might have been involved in this, is kind of what you're saying.
Well, Dick Cheney's company Halliburton made $60 billion off of the event.
So
not the event, but what they got to do because of the event, because of the war in Afghanistan.
Okay.
So do you think that there would have been other ways, like, and I'm not even going to go into whether or not they wanted to have a war in Iraq or Afghanistan, but were there
they were on record about wanting one.
Well, that I'm not going to even open that. What I'm saying is, assuming that they did, that 100% they're like, we want to go to war. Are there not other ways that are more feasible than attacking your own people and slaughtering thousands of American civilians and killing destroying a symbol of free trade and prosperity and humiliating your own country?
There are other ways, but false flags are the way that our country has always used. I would point to the Gulf of Tonkin incident as a backup on that. That never took place, and we used that to get into the Vietnam War. We use false flags all the time.
But
So they could use other methods, but that seems to be the one they like to use.
Okay. Because I think what throws me off there a little bit, and correct me if I'm missing something, but it just seems odd that they would use a story of Saudi hijackers to go to war with Iraq, a country that they were 100% just, I say they, like the U.S. and Europe as well, were 100% justified in going to war with for other reasons. Saddam Hussein he'd already violated so many different human rights abuses, including attacking his own people, using chemical weapons against the Kurds, invading Kuwait. Like, there were a number of fronts in which that we would have been entirely justified to go in without having an incident like 9/11. It just seems odd that they would have the Saudis hijack planes and have that be the cover story in order to go to war with Iraq. It just seems kind of nonsensical to me.
Okay, but what you just said sounded nonsensical to me, because over and over again we talked about how it was Saudi terrorists. Why did we never go to war with Saudi Arabia? Why would we go to war with Afghanistan? Why would Saudi Arabian terrorists be led by Osama bin Laden? There was a lot in that story that didn't make sense. So that's kind of nonsensical too. The official story is nonsensical.
And what do you consider as the official story?
I'm talking about the official establishment version of the 9/11 report. Basically, would be the official story with their account of what actually went down and what was behind each event.
Okay, just making sure that we're on the same page on that. Well, this is interesting. So this is like a very detailed belief that you have. Very much different than from a lot of the stuff that we talk about. And again, we haven't ever talked about conspiracy theory stuff before on this show. And so this is kind of new territory for me as well. Again, I'm trying to hold my personal beliefs out of the question. I will let you know that I personally don't have the same views that you do, but I also haven't done the research that you've done. So maybe there are some things that you know that I don't. Maybe there's some things I know. We don't know. We haven't had that dialogue yet. But as someone who would want to know more about this kinds of stuff, like if someone who is really interested in some of the details, what do you think is the best way to investigate whether or not an official story purported, about an event is true? Like, what is your go-to in figuring out whether something or not somebody is telling us is total BS or not?
Well, that's a very good question. Let's see, how would I answer that? I got to use something as an example here. The shooting in Vegas at the Mandalay Bay. To me, it was the conflicting stories. When eyewitness reports vary so differently from the news reports, when you're getting so much of an opposing opinion to what's actually being reported, those are the kind of things that would raise a flag for me, and then I would want to look at it deeper.
Okay, so first thing would be, because I'm sure you have a list of things, but first thing would be checking to see whether news reports conflict with eyewitness testimony. Is that right?
That would be a huge red flag, yes.
Okay, cool.
How would you be able to distinguish which one is more accurate? Because I know that it's easy for all of us, myself included, to become, an internet researcher. And if I'm not there on location, to hear stories from eyewitness testimonies. And would you say that an eyewitness testimony is, for the most part, usually accurate, or that it's a reliable way of determining the truth in a lot of these scenarios?
Not all of the time, no, because especially in a high-tense situation like a shooting, people would be very distracted, and they could be very wrong about what they think they saw.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, actually. I think that evidence has shown time and time again that eyewitness testimony about a lot of stuff doesn't add up when we look at some more objective ways of knowing things like video surveillance footage and stuff like that. But
what comes to mind is the Innocence Project, which basically there are quite a few people who have been released who were on death row for committing, crimes like murder and stuff. And then when DNA evidence came forth and we had the scientific capabilities to test, actual evidence that was, left at the scene of the crime, then they were exonerated. And so people's lives were almost ended. And there's an entire project that literally goes and tries to exonerate people who are on death row for crimes that they didn't commit, but they were put there by eyewitness testimony. So that to me, really screams that, oftentimes, eyewitnesses, even if there's, multiple, can still make mistakes, and they can still, especially if you're in a state of panic.
Yeah, I think so too. So bringing back to this conversation, you mentioned that the conflict between news and eyewitness testimony is a factor. And again, one of many different factors that you would suggest. But it seems to me that your belief also hinges on eyewitness testimony over official news reports, right? Because we're kind of questioning the validity of the news reports. Do you still hold...
It may have sounded that way because I don't really trust the mainstream media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Can I ask you specifically why?
Well, they've shown over and over again that they're untrustworthy.
Okay, but can I ask you specific sources? Because mainstream media is kind of like a broad term that can be used to describe. Can you name a specific source, maybe? Like a specific example of? I'm talking about the mainstream media that's owned by 6 corporations. That entire group. I try to stay away from that entire organization. Okay, so you mean just because everything. I have no faith in it anymore. You mean CNN, and Fox? Examples would be MSNBC, everything. Yeah, Fox, all of the big ones, news, MSNBC, CNN. I put no stock really in anything that they're reporting. I can't believe them anymore. Okay, so even subsidiaries of any of those news organizations, local news that have an affiliate with the larger national organizations, do those count under those? Yes, absolutely. Okay.
What would you consider a trustworthy source?
They all get their news from the same place, so you can go to the AP Newswire and find the same stories that the news is reporting on. You just don't have their particular spin on it.
Okay, the political spin.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of organizations, whether they're on the right or the left, if they are mainstream media, there are certain journalistic standards that they, require, that they, that me as a YouTuber, I can go out and really fact check and make some phone calls and send some emails and try to, go to the individuals and try to figure out, where are these stories coming from. But the fact is, most people I know, most YouTubers like me don't do that. Don't have the time or the energy or the resources, or even know how to. Do you think that when you say that the mainstream media, kind of as a generalized blanket, covering multiple different organizations, when you say that it's untrustworthy, do you think that they could get stuff wrong and make mistakes and still be trustworthy?
Yeah, absolutely. You could get, of course. And then if you're forthright with it and you come out and you say, hey, we misreported this particular story, that's a completely different thing than what I'm talking about. The media, this is all unread. This is not a conspiracy. Operation Mockingbird is a real thing. The CIA infiltrated the media way back in the 50s. And propaganda is legal to use against the American people. It was made legal by President Obama. And the government it's on record that they've used propaganda and portrayed it as news on the media. So that's different than misreporting a story and then having to retract it.
Okay. So this kind of, that's a whole other branch of stuff. That's what makes conversations like these so hard, because we only have so much time to talk about these things.
Right.
And there's a lot of things that we could talk about. But I just want to kind of reel it right back into 9/11, right? Because that's what we kind of started off with at first. And just to kind of reel it back home and, kind of broadly cover this. So, this is interesting for me because I was in elementary school when 9/11 happened, I was very, very young. So everything that I've had to hear about is from other people. It wasn't something that I really kind of witnessed myself or knew any of the geopolitics that were behind it. But I have seen a growing movement of people who are going towards this idea that, hey, maybe there was some other stuff going on. And I think even polls that I've read have shown that there's a lot of Americans that feel the same way, that feel, hey, that maybe they don't think that it was a total shadow manipulation, but maybe that the full story wasn't exactly what was going on. And of course, with wartime stuff, we always had to be careful with the news because people have different points of views and different sides. So I want to go back to this question of knowing how we can know what's true and what's not true. You've mentioned a couple different things here. You've talked about maybe just not trusting mainstream news sources in general, which I think is super, super interesting. You talked about using science as a way of trying to validate things, whether or not they're physically possible. Are there any other methods that you would recommend about trying to figure out how to know whether things are true or not?
Just to do your own research. You can find out these things for yourself. You can look into things for yourself and learn for yourself. If you only take in what everyone tells you is true and you never question or look into whether it's true or not, I'm sure you appreciate this with your show, then you can't. How did you come to your own opinions on those things? So I would just say you look into everything. If something seems off to you, look at why. And if you find something, then you find something. If you don't, then you don't. But at least now you've found whatever you can now consider to be your truth.
Well, okay, so what I'm trying to get at a little bit more is, so for example, you have your own show where you talk about a lot of these ideas and stuff, right? So let's say me as like a casual observer who's trying to learn more information about this, like why should I, and playing devil's advocate here, right? Why should I trust your show and your source over other different sources? What makes the truth that you're spitting out about this more reliable than the next guy's?
Well, and I guess to double on top of that, how do we know that you're not planted by the CIA to put a spin on another story to throw people off from the real story?
Yeah.
And I'm to some extent I'm being facetious, but at the same time, like it's a legitimate question. Like, how can you tell?
Yeah. The way I would tell a shill, that's what I would call who you just described, is somebody that doesn't get into the Israel connection, that doesn't talk about Israel. When they stay away from that topic, I would consider that person to be a shill. And to get into the other question that you had asked me there, my sources of truth, I feel like I'm pulling from respected media that can be trusted. Like, I would trust and report on something I read in a WikiLeaks, because WikiLeaks has never had to retract a story in their whole entire existence. If I find something on the Newswire and then I can verify it on another one, because there's three big ones, and if I can verify it and check it out for myself, then I would go ahead and stand behind that. And my brand of truth would be valuable, because I don't try and push something that I can fully get behind. I'll be forthright with you and let you know. For example, you were saying a YouTuber can't go out and do the investigative journalism they may need to do. I'm forthright about that. So I'm not going to tell you, hey, this is 100% true.
Okay, yeah. So you value independent research, and you value sources that you can trust.
I think everyone should.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, like, one final question, because we do have to get on to other callers, and I do appreciate you coming on and talking to us. I want to know, like, how you value these sources. What gives these sources greater value than the mainstream media? I mean, you talked about corporate ownership kind of maybe affects how media might be portrayed, in the mainstream news sense. But going back to your sources of what you talk about, what gives you? So you mentioned WikiLeaks, like they don't never retract, statements and stuff like that.
Never had to.
Okay. Is there any other, like, for your understanding of how to find a reliable source? Do you have a methodology for that? Do you have a way of figuring that out?
Yeah, I mean it ties into the big picture of not trusting mainstream media. So I stay away from that entirely, and then it'd be all independent sources. And I would just, it's a crapshoot, really. You find someone that you follow that is, in journalism, like say TYT, for example, is an independent channel where they were before they got bought. I would follow them. And they were at least forthright with you when they would misreport something, but they would cover things like Standing Rock that the mainstream media wouldn't even touch. So that's where I would get my news from, is independent journalism. And actually foreign channels like RT.
Okay, cool.
I was wondering if I could throw one final question in just to kind of wrap this one up.
Thomas wants another one in.
And that's because this is something that has always frustrated me in the realm of conspiracy theories is I would completely, and I'm going to kind of give away my position a little bit here, but I would completely agree with you that conspiracies happen.
Yes.
That there are things that the government does, whether it's MK Ultra or whether it's the Bay of Pigs or the Gulf of Tonkin, that they've been exposed. They didn't hide it well, and it leaked out. And most of these things, they were rather small scale, like with the case of MK Ultra, they were investigating the use of LSD on people without them knowing that they were taking it or something.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you draw the line between something like that and, say, a full-blown, reptilians from outer space are coming down and everyone is reptilian in government and they're controlling everything and they're puppet masters and everyone is in on it and there's hundreds of thousands or millions of people that are all lying to you and something like that, that's a grand conspiracy that's very, damn near impossible to cover up, versus something that is, kind of a small scale, hey, we can influence this government's election by doing, X, Y, Z. Where would you draw the line between something like that? And would you say that there's ever a point at which a grand conspiracy should be believed? Or at what point would it be acceptable to buy into something? And at what point would it just be the suspension of disbelief would be too difficult to buy into something?
It's a very difficult question, but I'll try to answer it as simply as I can. Of course, there's a line. I don't believe every conspiracy. I don't consider myself to be a flat earther, but I don't believe that NASA's telling me the truth. You see, that would be my line, I guess, something like that. I can't follow you all the way over that cliff, but I can at least get on board with you that NASA is a deceitful organization.
Okay. Well, Sean, this is
Did that answer your question at all? Because that's how I took it, is that you want to know if I had some sort of a line or if there's a limit to what I'll believe.
Sort of. I think I would be curious because, just saying that NASA isn't something to be trusted, I don't know, on its face, that doesn't convince you of anything, right? Because that's your word versus somebody else's. But I think Thomas was he was really trying to get at was, okay, so you obviously don't believe in some conspiracy theories. Not all conspiracy theories are created equal. Is there a line? Like, he's looking for the line. He's looking for the whole world is a matrix and we're all in a video game versus, a government did something one time
to manipulate an election.
At this point.
Because I'll look at something, even something like Bigfoot. To me, that's a very small scale, or Loch Ness. It's a very small scale conspiracy. It's, hey, maybe there's a big ape. Well, we know that there's apes. We know that there's bears. It could be just a bear sighting. To me, until I actually see evidence of a Bigfoot that's not just a blurry photograph that could be easily photoshopped, I'm gonna stay skeptical. I'm like, all right, I need some evidence. But to me, that's a small level thing. That's, but if all of a sudden everyone was saying that Bigfoot is everywhere and that he's taking over the bodies of humans and planting himself inside of them and ruling governments and stuff, that's kind of a grand scale conspiracy. That's a much bigger thing. And I'm wondering, how do you determine the conspiracies that are something small, like, hey, a government manipulating something, and they're, this one's believable, but this one is not. To me, 9/11 would be a line that I would draw. There's too many players that would have to be involved, too many people that would have to keep quiet and keep secret. When you start applying Occam's razor to it, it doesn't really hold water. That's my opinion. I understand that we're not here to argue or debate the truth of something. We're more looking at how you can get to truth, and I'm kind of curious how you would draw that line, or how you would go about determining a conspiracy that is, believable, scalable or small scale enough to buy into versus one that's just like, okay, now you're off your rocker.
Okay, I think I understand what you're asking me. The way that I would determine where to draw the line is, I guess it's not breaking down the same way for me. I don't look at it the same way. I don't, I do have grand conspiracies. I believe in the New World Order and the Illuminati. I don't think that's unbelievable. I also don't think that 9/11 being a false flag operation carried out by our government with the help of Israel is unbelievable either. Because I don't think you need that many people involved, you see. I've heard that argument, but I don't think you need that many people involved. Because not everyone's being deceptive with you. Not everyone even knows what they're involved in. Like, for example, when they built the atomic bomb, they used compartmentalization. Most people didn't know they were working on an atomic bomb.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So, like, in your worldview, it's not without maybe a new world order and people being reptilians and what Thomas is talking about here.
Reptilians, I don't buy into.
Reptilians don't buy into.
Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. So there's a distinction you're making, right? Reptilians are out of the way.
Looking for? Okay. Well, I went with the flat Earth example earlier, and it didn't seem like it answered his question. I thought that's what he was looking for, but.
But what, like, we want to know? Okay, so you don't accept flat Earth. You don't accept reptilians. We don't really know what makes. So for us, like the realm of plausibility.
What's the difference? Why is flat Earth ridiculous?
Yeah. You know, like, just like for me, I would say flat Earth is ridiculous because of like scientific advancements and stuff and how we understand the universe. Right? Like, that's a method I would use.
Yeah, I hear a lot of the same arguments being used for flat Earth, like, you know, we can't trust NASA, and that the government is covering it up, and that you know, because they're trying to. Usually, it's put forth by. Christians or Muslims or religious people who maybe they'll read a literal interpretation that makes it seem like the earth is flat, and they'll say, look, they're just it's an atheist agenda to try to destroy people's faith.
Right.
And
so Thomas is like, for these people, they're actually using the Bible or the Quran to justify their worldview. They're saying, oh, I know this is true because this source is telling me that this is true. So like there's the method, and that's kind of what we're trying to get at with the question. So like the method.
What is the source?
Yeah,
but,
like what is.
They'll use the same type of arguments. Like the government pulls off conspiracies. Why wouldn't they pull off a flat Earth conspiracy? The government, NASA's not to be trusted, so therefore all these pictures from NASA must be photoshopped of the Earth. And, it starts getting to this grand scale where you have all these other countries and all their space programs that are in on it. You've got all this other stuff that's going on. And to me, it requires a tremendous amount of, suspension of belief in order to buy into the flat Earth thing. But that's me, and I realize that the flat Earth is one that you don't believe in. But why don't you believe in the flat Earth based off of the arguments that they're putting forth versus something like 9/11 that have the same type of arguments behind it? What's the distinction, the difference?
I think I got you now. We're on the same page now. Finally,
great.
Took me a little while to catch up with you, but all right. When I think about flat Earth, I don't trust NASA. So I can agree with you that they have reasons to believe that because of their mistrust of NASA or their reasons for not trusting NASA. But I don't have the ability to do a lot of the experiments that would need to be necessary to do to say something is the Earth is flat. I don't understand those things. There's sometimes I have to leave it up to those that know more than me. I believe that there's too many of them that would have to be lying to me in that particular instance.
When you say too many of them, do you mean like scientific experts, like physicists and stuff?
There's too many. Yeah, everything I've ever been taught, every teacher I've ever had, every scientist that I've ever read, their research or their discoveries about different things, they were all lying to me. They had to all been involved. That's too many people. So sometimes I do join you on the too many people argument.
Okay. Yeah, because I was about to say, but everyone I've ever heard that's talked to me about 9/11 has said that the official story is true, and that would be that my teachers and my parents and other people are all lying to me there, so...
Or, if the majority of engineers and scientists and whatnot said that, that we can reconstruct this demolition the building collapse and show it's not a demolition and do it through a building fire and show that fire and heat does damage the structural integrity of steel enough for it to bend and collapse the way that it did. You know, if the majority consensus of experts, and I'm not talking government paid experts, I'm talking people who are, you know, just engineers, average everyday people who've gone to university, who've studied, who, you know, are well versed in the topics. You know, if they're able to show stuff like this, you know, would that be, you know, a convincing argument in the same way that it's a convincing argument for the flat Earth for you?
Yeah, if I saw real evidence put forth in front of me, I would have to acknowledge it. I mean, my beliefs aren't etched in stone, so it could be changed. If I was shown proof that I could accept as proof, like you were saying, from an acceptable source that I could trust, yes, my view could be changed.
Okay, cool. Well, I think that's all the time that we have for this call.
Yeah. Sorry, I dragged that one out.
That was
I know we have other
fantastic.
callers on the line.
Thomas, you were asking really great questions. And Sean, I really appreciate you coming on your show, expressing your views. I thought this was a really interesting conversation. I want to do two things for you, Sean, because you did plug my show yesterday, and without me asking you to or do anything, I want you to just briefly, because you're on today, I'd love for you to just, you know, give a quick shout out for your show, what you do, so people can find you. And the second thing is, I want you to promise me that you're going to call again so that we can talk about the NASA moon landing conspiracy stuff, because I'd love to have a conversation about that.
Absolutely, I would call again. I had a great time. And the show is called Conspiracy Theories and Chill, and I stream it live from my Facebook page. And you just follow me on Facebook. It's Sean Yankee. I know there's 3 Sean Yankees, but I'm the good-looking one with the sunglasses on. And I also have a YouTube channel called Me on Things and Stuff.
That's
and I
awesome.
archive everything there.
Okay, so people who are watching this and want to get more engaged in the conversation, go to those pages and be nice and talk to people and talk to people who think differently than you and have good conversations.
It sounds kind of like Netflix and chill, but with like the X-Files theme song in the background the whole time. Like,
right.
Investigations. All right. Well, Sean,
Yeah,
this was a great conversation. I'd love to hear from you again. Thanks again for calling.
Thank you.
Well, what did you think of that, Thomas?
It was interesting that this approach is different from what I'm used to, because like there were a bunch of times when I had to kind of step back because I wanted to be like, well, what about this source and this, you know, and I wanted to just like pummel him with you know, resources and stuff. But it's really interesting to use this approach, because it's like kind of almost peeling back the layers of the onion to look inside and be like, what makes someone think the way that they do? What does, and it's extremely eye-opening, especially whether it's a conspiracy theorist. And I'd love if you were able to get a flat earther on sometime.
I'd love to
try to figure out how is it that they make this leap. What is that? Are there certain missing pieces of education that are there that, you know, they don't have a scientific basis to know how to fact check or know how to, you know, run the math or
that's some interesting
do the tests,
presumptions. I also think it's like, you know, like there's different warrants to these kinds of, because like you said, some conspiracies are real, like that happens, and I do agree with that. So like we can't just make fast and hard rules for a lot of these kinds of stuff. I think you have to do it by a case basis, like you said, peeling back the layers individually and talking about these things. And in this case, there was a lot of warrants and assumptions being made. One of the biggest ones, for example, not trusting mainstream news. And I really wanted to get more of that. It's like, okay, so now we have a source problem, right? Because like that's a lot of things. And so can we really say that all of those things aren't trustworthy? Or can some of those be trustworthy some of the time? Like, you know, because that's almost a conspiracy in itself. And there's a lot of layers to this, you know?
I agree with him partially in that mainstream media, it does have a political agenda. Everyone, you have a political agenda. I have a political agenda. The amount that we play up to it, you know, we can do our best to try to be neutral on issues and to just present the facts. And I think that, you know, the onus is on us to try to do that if we are actually putting forth a you know, journalistic perspective on something. Where I think I would disagree with him is that there is a tremendous amount of effort that is put into fact checking.
Yes.
There are entire fact checking teams from these mainstream media sources, and that's such a general term. That's a blanket term. But there's if CNN gets something wrong, you damn well better believe that Fox News is going to call them out on it. If Fox News gets something out that's wrong, you're going to see John Oliver doing a bit on it. They're tearing each other apart. They're looking for any kind of inconsistencies or anything to try to show how the other side is wrong. And so they are doing their best. They are doing their best to present information in as accurate of a way as possible. Now, are there different, some sources that are more and less reliable? Sure. But I would say, first, if you want to know if something is true or not, is it scientifically possible?
Yes.
Is it, something like, the Earth being flat, like we can demonstrably prove, and we can run experiments and we can show that it's BS. And then it's like, is it believable? Is it plausible? How many people would have to be in on this? How much, when you start applying Occam's razor to it and say, how many assumptions do we have to make, for this to be true? It's like, if there's two different competing, ideas, the one that puts forth the least assumptions is probably the one you should go with, and you have a safer bet going with that. And then what is the motive? And is that the most plausible way for them to go about that to accomplish the motive? Most conspiracy theories, I find, don't really stack up under this kind of scrutiny. But I know we have two more callers.
Yeah, but like what you just said there is very similar to the methods that I use all the time when I'm doing the research myself on these kinds of things, right? Plausibility, we're talking about physical possibility, we're talking about all these things that we can use to check. And like what you're describing takes effort. What you're describing is something that the average person who doesn't always have the resources to do these things on their own, can't always do for every single belief. And for all of our beliefs, it's impossible. We can't just know. But I do think that because of that we have to keep our beliefs, keep strongly to the ones that we've tested the most and known the most, and not have too many beliefs that we can't verify, because then it becomes a problem of falsification. It becomes a problem of knowing what's true and what's not true.
And just because something seems like you're like, oh, that doesn't seem to stack up. This story was released and this, doesn't match up with the eyewitness testimony and stuff, like, it's really easy for us on the outside to assume that there's some type of conspiracy and to then start becoming internet, investigators and stuff. This happened during the Boston Marathon bombings.
Yeah.
Where
exactly.
There was like one news source that like they preemptively, like obviously they're in a rush to get news out faster, and they want to be the first to the story. And so one of them misreported that like the guy had been captured and he hadn't been captured yet, and they're like, oh look, it's not reliable. It's like, okay, it's not that the news outlet was deliberately trying to lie. Like the guy was, caught a little bit later. Then there were all these people saying like, look, the bombings were, there was this, SWAT or some like, government groups that were there at the thing. It's like, well, yeah, there's always law enforcement at big events like that. There's always people trying to look to, for any kind of threat. And to try to jump to conclusions based off of, I saw some pictures on the internet and I tried to piece some things together and find some correlations or connections. You got to be careful with that.
Yeah.
You got to be careful.
For sure. Well, that was our first time talking about a real conspiracy theory on this show, like in any sort of depth. So, and Sean was gracious enough to come on so that we could kind of have that kind of dialogue. If you're somebody who holds a belief in a conspiracy theory or otherwise and wants to specifically challenge us or to try to make us convince us that it's true, I'm more than down for that. That wasn't really what Sean was trying to do today. Sean, he was just kind of let himself out there, and that's cool. But in the future, I'd love to have more conversations exactly like what we had. And like the more specific, the better. If you have a belief that you want us to tackle and see, like, if we can, just see what we think of it. I'd love to have more conversations like that.
I have a psychic premonition that the next caller is a flat earther.
Well, you'd be wrong. Our next caller is coming in from California. This is Karen, who wanted to talk to us about aura and light work healing. That's what I'm reading here in the notes. What's going on, Karen?
Hi, Thomas. Hi, Dan. I'm calling because I need some help, and I don't know what to do. I'll just very, very, very quick background. Up until about a year and a half ago, I was completely in, I guess you would call it the New Age community and alternative religions, alternative medicine, and all that kind of stuff. I didn't do a lot of it, and I tended to be kind of a skeptic, but a year and a half ago, I decided I almost got someone almost tried to commit fraud on me with alternative medicine.
Oh, no.
And I mean, yeah, and I didn't fall for it. And so I left that community. And it was a really big deal because I spent a lot of time investing with friends. I made friends that were all in it and everything. And I really like my friends, and I really don't want to lose my friends. And so what I did is I just sort of try to avoid the subject. But now it's getting to the point where it's almost impossible to avoid it because, it's like, people don't always know where you're at. You don't always tell them right. Mm-hmm. So I have this really good friend. And first of all, I have to explain to you that my family believed in aura reading, and my brother said he could see auras. I had a lot of mediums in my family, and I have a cousin who's a light worker. And then I have this friend she's a really, really good friend of mine. And I've already come out as an atheist to her, so she kind of knows where I'm coming from now. But she told me the other day, she showed me a picture of her aura. And I don't know if you know much about reading auras and how they take pictures, but in my opinion, it's not what I would call good science. Okay, it's not very scientifically, technologically demonstrated. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, normally I would just avoid it and let it go, but it's getting to the point where I can't avoid it anymore. So let me explain what I mean. So she has this picture of her, with her aura. Okay. And then she told me that the lady that did it, she knows her, and she keeps telling my friend that she would be a great light worker. Now, I know that's very expensive because my cousin did it. You have to pay a lot of money, you take a lot of time to learn it. And I'm worried that my friend is going to be built of money, basically, for this. Now, I'm not saying that the person who's told her this doesn't really believe it. Maybe she does, okay? But let me just give you a quick example of what I meant. So we're talking, and I'm trying to avoid the subject. Well, there's a town nearby where we live, and my family's from there, and her family's from there, and 80% of the town just burnt down. You might have heard Donald Trump's coming to California because he wants to see the fire damage. Mm-hmm. And this was devastating. And my friend, the first thing I saw her again, the first thing she says to me is, hey, the people there are really hurting because the town is gone. My relatives have lost their home. And so I believe I can heal and send these energy out to them to make them feel better. And this is just so painful. And I agree with what Thomas said earlier, that these things are not harmless. And I'm just wondering if you guys can help me. How do I talk to my friends about this now? I mean, how do I say it without sounding offensive to them and making them angry and turning them off, and yet keeping them from signing over several thousands of dollars to these people that want them to become these healers? Because, I don't care what anybody says. 80% of that town is gone, and people have died, and there's no light working in the world that's going to heal them, in my opinion.
Mm. Well, there's a lot of things that could be said about that. Both Thomas and I think, feel pretty strongly about pseudoscience in general, about how we should be talking about it, how we should be educating other people about why these beliefs can sometimes be harmful if not taken into consideration. I think the first thing I would say is, okay, obviously she's making an investment in this. Sounds like several $1,000s, sounds like lots of time. I think anything you do, whether it's buying a new car or moving to a new house, going to a new job, any kind of investment like that, you need to have a serious conversation about anyway. So hopefully she's not actually offended by the thought of you actually talking to her about this in the first place. I think that first needs to get in order as far as level of priorities. So maybe if you really want to have a conversation about this, that's probably the first thing I would do as far as framing it, right? The other thing I would do is, I would look at the sources that she's pulling out, because people who are usually involved in this are usually getting interested because they know some people that are also doing it. And a lot of these kinds of organizations, how they work, they're usually talking in person to people, and they're doing small demonstrations and things. So she must be getting some sort of reason why she's come to this belief. I mean, as far as I know, or as far as what you told me, it sounds like this is a pretty recent thing. So it wasn't something that she's always, talked about. So I would figure out, okay, where is this coming from? What's going on? And have a conversation about that. Say, okay, well, maybe she showed you this thing, but is it possible that there's some other explanations as to why this photograph showed up the way that I did. I know like a little bit about the aura stuff and the light working and stuff. I remember once reading about the descriptions of like indigo children and how they can like, read auras and stuff. And then I was reading like, oh, they're usually like born in the 80s and 90s and they have like light colored eyes. And I was like, oh man, this description almost sounds like me. Maybe I'm actually like an indigo kid and I can do all this stuff. But yeah, like I would say start the conversation.
I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if that's going to ever happen, but there are legitimate reasons besides, hey, I think this is BS for you to have this conversation with. I think you should be confident in approaching it that way. What are your thoughts, Thomas?
So whenever you talk to someone about something like this, depending on how emotionally invested they are in the idea, there's a couple ways that you can go about it, but I would encourage you to not shy away from talking to your friend about it, but approach them in a way that you would to anyone who's about to, do something that could potentially be a bad investment. And if you come at them saying, hey, you're an idiot and I can't believe that you're doing this and how could you have bought into this? You're so stupid. Obviously, that's going to cause them to throw their walls up. But if you do it in such a way, and I'm talking from a position of experience because I've had these conversations with people who, like, an example was about a year and a half ago, I went to kind of investigate and stay at a New Age wellness center in Thailand. And, I'm living there. So, like, this is my home. I don't want to tick off my host and have them, kick me out or something. But at the same time, they're talking about, psychics and energy healing and all this, quantum woo and stuff, which to me is like, it's not just BS, but it can be really harmful too if there's someone who maybe they're like, oh, hey, I have cancer and I heard that this stuff can heal me. And so I decided to stop taking my, prescribed meds or chemo or something to opt for this alternative. People die. People used to go, and I think they still do, to the Philippines all the time for psychic surgery, and it was literally someone who was palming chicken guts, using sleight of hand and making it seem like they were pulling out stuff from the intestines. And this has been, that's one thing that's been, shown on live TV, even on Johnny Carson. James Randi did, psychic surgery live on TV and debunked it. But when it comes to the auras and stuff, just if you do it from a mindset of like, hey, if I was talking to Dan, I'd be like, Dan, I love you, man, and I'm concerned. Like, as your friend, just like I wouldn't want you to let me throw away thousands of dollars on something that's a bad investment. Like buying a used car that has, a blown radiator and a shot engine. You would try to help me so that I don't, fall down that making that bad choice. If you approach your friend in the same way and you say like, hey, I really care about you, you don't act like you're, smarter and more, like she's an idiot or something, but just say like, hey, if there's something to this, and maybe there is, then how can we find out? How can we test it? What are some ways that we can test it? And I've been doing a little bit of research, and I really, really, really care about you. So I really hope that you'll take the time to one, understand that I'm coming from a place of love, and I've done this research so that I can share this with you, and I've taken time out of my day to try to figure out if there's anything to this. And what I found kind of surprised me. And then you can share with her. I've done a whole series on psychics and stuff. I'm actually about to release a video with another YouTuber named Professor Stick, literally on this topic, on energy healing and on chi ignition, where they spontaneously light fires and stuff. And I'm going to kind of show some of the tricks that they use, and just show how, send her some of these resources, show, maybe the James Randi Educational Foundation had $1 million challenge for over 50 years for anyone who could prove that this type of stuff was real. And they had hundreds of people come forward that were tested and nothing ever came of it. Like every single one of them they couldn't prove that they had these powers. When you put the scientific controls in place, when you got rid of the ability for them to cheat or lie or use sleight of hand, when it was tested against placebos, there was nothing there. And I think if you show your friend that in a way that's loving and open, I don't see how that would be taken the wrong way if you're really genuine about wanting to help them and you make it clear that you're coming from a place of love.
Yeah, for sure.
Does that help at all?
Yes, my friend actually, I think that's a lot of wisdom. My friend is very, very smart. She was able to get her bachelor's degree in like a year or two, just breezing through an accelerated program. And I think a lot of what's bothering her, and maybe you guys can address this, is it's more of an emotional thing. So what I mean by that is this, like you were saying, Dan, what has happened recently. Well, it is true that my friend has always kind of believed in this, but so have I. And I think she feels like now she's lost this friend who can be supportive of her because I no longer believe these things. Also, her husband is an atheist and skeptic, and so she feels like she has to push back against that. And then in addition to all of that, this new person she's hanging out with, someone who knows she's met before, is one of these people that takes her aura machine to these psychic fairs. And I don't know if you know about this. I did some research and I found out these machines cost $10,000. They're really expensive. And this woman bought it a while back, so she probably bought this expensive one. The new ones that are done with software are a little bit less expensive. But anyway, she's doing the thing that happened to me. She's telling my friend that, oh, you'd be so good at this. You could heal people and you do good for the world. And this appeals to my friend. And then in addition to that, this woman does teach us classes, and this friend of mine, she says, well, she hasn't asked me to take a class, and I'm thinking to myself, well, of course not. The best way to get somebody's confidence is to make you trust them. And sure enough, she says, oh, but I really trust this woman. I know her and I trust her. And I don't know how to counter that part. How do you counter the part of that emotional attachment?
Absolutely. This is critical, absolutely critical. And this is the biggest mistake I see people make in the skeptic community, is that they don't account for these emotional relationships and these emotional ties that have happened. For her to come to this belief, it didn't happen in a day, right? And you're not going to not convince her that this is all wrong in a day either. And that's something first I would accept, because when we form these beliefs like this, there's a lot of branches to them. You know, one, she has this woman that's telling her things. She thinks she's seeing these things that are actually happening to people. There's lots and lots of things going on that have to be broken down individually. And that's really, really hard. But it can be done. And I say that with the confidence for myself and my own beliefs, and Thomas for the people that he's seen and talked with. But it does take time, and it does take patience, and it does take love. So you mentioned some specific things. Let me try to give some advice for the specific things you mentioned. If there's more stuff maybe that she's talking about as citing for why she believes this stuff, then go ahead. And first, I would also, kind of do the Socratic method of asking her why and how, like Thomas exactly was saying. Are these the best methods? I think that's good. What you're describing to me sounds a lot like a multi-level marketing scheme. When you get people that you trust and you invite them to classes and they get them to pay money forward on things, there's a lot of things going on. So maybe looking at some, like the anti-MLM subreddit, for example, where you can show some other similar situations and some people, maybe you can find a website or a forum of people describing their experiences negatively about these auras and things like that. And you can show them to people, be like, hey, look, I found this source about these people saying that these things were happening to them. And here's like one that had similar experiences to you, but also came to a different conclusion. And maybe asking them, why do you think that they came to this conclusion rather than the ones you're concluding to? And at first, she's probably going to rationalize it away and say, oh, maybe it depends on what you're talking about, but maybe it's like, oh, they didn't believe hard enough, or they didn't put in all their right resources and stuff. But it's a start. It's a start to how you can talk about this.
And I doubt that your friend is, or that your friend's friend is coming from a place of malice. I doubt that, most of the time, sometimes there are people who will deliberately con and deliberately deceive and stuff. In most cases, like, I'll look at some of the big name psychics and it's really obvious that they're obvious cons. Like, they're obviously lying. The methods that they're using, there's no doubt about it. But most of the smaller ones, most of the smaller time ones, they've bought into it too. And, in this case, I would tell your friend, like, I don't think that your friend's lying to you, but, deliberately lying to you or trying to deceive you. But what if she's wrong? What's the harm that can come from some of this? Telling someone that they're healed when they're not, telling them, oh, you don't need your meds anymore because, you got psychic healing, and maybe send her to some online resources. There's some websites. I think one of them is literally called like What's the Harm? And it'll go through and it'll show with some of the stuff that you think is just, it just makes people feel better. Oh, it's just fun to play around with. And it's not. It has some serious horrific harm that can come as a result of it. And so maybe kind of showing, cautioning your friend against it, saying, look, I really care about you, but I don't want you to accidentally hurt people, because I know you would never want to do that because you're a good person. I know you're wanting to help people, but what if you're wrong? What if you're wrong about this and this person goes and, or what if you're wrong about it and you say that you can heal someone and then they go and they wind up dying or getting hurt more or something? Like, imagine what would happen if you did that. And then maybe that'll plant enough kind of not just doubt but hesitation in your friend enough to go and look at some of these resources and research it further before investing heavily in it and then going out and practicing it on people.
Yeah, that sounds like a really, really good idea. My big fear is that she would give her money to this person. And I agree, this person probably is very sincere and probably believes what she's teaching. But my big fear, my friend is so sensitive. I'm so worried that she would think like she could heal a child from cancer or something. And then when it doesn't work, could you imagine how devastating that would feel? I don't think I could live with myself. And I'm not sure my friend could either. So I'm trying to figure a way to just really gently tell her or help her with this. But I don't think avoiding the subject has been helping either.
No.
I've been giving her lots of extra attention, too. So, because I said she's, really grieving on behalf of her relatives at Paradise, California. That's the name of the town that's burnt down. And I think, well, maybe I need to be a better friend, too. And I think it's helping. Just letting her know that I'm there for her.
Mm-hmm. I just want to add on, because you said, I don't think ignoring it has been helping. And I think that's so critical to people who are watching this and who are maybe going through similar situations, or they're starting to see the signs of this, because it's kind of like a vaccine with some of these things. You kind of have to introduce these things early so that before people can form these beliefs that are harmful, that they're already kind of introduced to the concepts and they know that the warning signs are happening. Because our skepticism, our ability to talk about this critically, is the result of a lot of years of education, a lot of years of study. And again, not everybody has access to that, first of all. So there's the problem of that. But you have to understand that everyone, the perspective that we've gained has come from experience with this stuff. And for myself, it's been personal involvement with a lot of these things. But trying to, I think, because your friend values these experiences and values this person who's telling you things. Well, again, I would just say, give her some people who have also been in there and have experiences and are coming away with different conclusions. Because I agree with you that it's all fun and games until someone gets hurt, until financial investments are made, until people are starting to take money out that they can't pay back. And it happens. It happens every day. And I think you are being a good friend by trying to have this conversation with her. And hopefully she can understand that and realize that, hey, you're not pushing back just to push back. You have these real legitimate concerns. And that's how I would start this conversation, trying to frame it in the best way possible.
Yeah, and I think it's important, too, to stress and to emphasize to your friend that you are still her friend no matter how things turn out. That, you really, don't want her to make a decision that would be hard to live with afterwards, that would hurt her financially or potentially hurt others physically. But at the same time, you're to come across as someone who's there to support and to help, and to, you're coming from a place of love. If you're like, hey, it's just my way or the highway, then I think that would come off, it would be too harsh, it'd be too abrasive. People don't usually change their mind overnight. So you might be the one friend who's kind of the voice of reason, and she may make the wrong choice. She might go off and invest in this, and someone gets hurt, and then she remembers that, hey, you weren't too hard on her, you weren't judgmental, you were just telling her what the problem was, and maybe a year or two later, when she realizes that she's made a mistake, then that door's still open and she can still come back and be like, hey, man, you were right, I messed up with this. And that
thanks
that very well
thanks, Thomas.
yeah.
Yeah, because I do want to keep her as a friend. She's a great friend, and it just really, I just don't want to lose a friend over something like this. I lost so much when I left this whole community, and I really value certain people's friendships, and I do still want to be there for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it sounds like you're wanting to speak up because you don't want to do a disservice to your friend.
And you know what? The more that she gets involved with this, the more she's going to build a community, and she's going to have people that she's going to disappoint by leaving as well. So, not to scare you or anything, but time is of the essence in some sense. These beliefs, like you said, they aren't built in a day. They do keep happening, and there are some people that end up believing this stuff for life, and I do think, it is my personal belief, that there are people who come to beliefs who will never change their minds one way or the other. And that's really sad to say, because we all want to be open about everything. But from what I've seen from people, I haven't been convinced that, everybody can change. Not to say that your friend can't change, because I do believe she can. It sounds like she hasn't been involved with it long enough to, to reach that threshold yet. But I would say, yeah, keep it up. Don't let her go. Be a good friend, because you are a good friend, by talking to her about this, for sure.
Well, I think all of us have had some beliefs that we've been pretty solid in that we've changed our mind on. And, I wouldn't be quick to write anyone off as not able to change their minds, because I've seen people have radical transformations in certain ideas and ideologies that they hold.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, it's true.
Well, I myself committed myself for the long haul. I mean, I was raised with this stuff, and my family were spiritualists and everything. And I just can't believe that I have even left, because I thought I was going to believe this forever. It was like it's going to be reincarnated and do all this stuff. And it was a big shock that I left. But I've seen her do these things already. Like, she's already talking about how she got up in the morning, she started healing people in her head. And I'm going, oh no, because I have been there. I've been there. I mean, I wasn't a healer or anything, but I was consider myself a medium and a psychic. And I used to think I could do all this stuff, and it was just all an illusion.
You are in such a great position to talk to her. You have all these experiences. You can explain the specific mechanisms as to why these things are going on.
I'm really curious now, too. You said that you used to be a psychic. I have a whole series. My channel is called HolyKoolaid on YouTube. And I have a whole series. If you just type in HolyKoolaid Psychics and you just search for playlists, it's like the first one to come up. And I'm really curious what your feedback would be on that. So
get a little plug in there.
Okay.
I'm just kind of curious because, as someone who was a psychic before and isn't anymore, I would really love to, if you're able to, shoot me an email or something about it.
Well, I'm curious now too, Karen. I think what should happen is, again, this is 2 callers in a row, but I think you should call again so you can talk about some of these other experiences that you've personally had. We won't be having a show next week because we'll be off for Thanksgiving and stuff. But the week after that, so the 30th or any other time, I'd love for you to call in again just so you can talk about it. I think that'd be really cool.
Okay, I can do that.
Cool.
And I'll do both those things. I'll call in a couple weeks, and I will check out I have heard of HolyKoolaid. I haven't looked at it much, but I am interested in taking a look, Thomas.
Cool.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, Karen, I hope that was some good advice. I hope you can get something from that. And good luck with your friend. And remember that it's not just you. There's lots of people that are on your side and feel the same way you do. Don't lose confidence. Keep it up, because to me, it sounds like you're a very concerned friend who has a lot of experience with this stuff. And you're a valuable source. And I hope your friend recognizes that.
Sounds like you're in the best position, too, of anyone to talk to her.
Thank you, and I appreciate the wisdoms you 2 guys have, too, because my problem has always been being able to engage people in conversation without getting them upset, because I do tend to be a little forceful sometimes, and now I'm trying to ask questions instead of just telling people, hey, it's bullshit or whatever.
Yeah. Well, welcome to my show.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dan's a lot nicer than I am. I call it like I see it. I'll just be like,
But that's good, though. You know, I believe in a multiplicity of voices. I don't think that one way of doing things is the only way.
Yeah.
I'm glad that there's multiple people that do it different ways. But thanks again, Karen. I hope to hear from you again.
Okay.
This was a really awesome call.
You
I hit the drop button before she got to say her last name. But
Got to be careful with that trigger happy.
Yeah. But I mean, I love that call. You know, it's an incredibly sad situation, and it's something that I don't have a lot of personal experience with people who got financially involved in stuff like what she's describing. I know people who have like dabbled, you know, who kind of talk about it, but like I don't know what it's like to have like a really good friend fall for that kind of stuff, and that's got to be really, really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I have some experience with like people who go down the young Earth creationism rabbit hole, and they're, you know, pretty soon they're buying Jim Baker buckets of, you know, $100 food buckets for the apocalypse when Jesus returns. And, you know, some of that stuff is like, you know, how do you tell someone when they're so emotionally invested in an idea? It can be hard. I did have one friend try to get me into multi-level marketing when I was in college. And I took a look at it and I was like, how is this different from a pyramid scheme exactly? Because I'd just been like studying about like Ponzi and like Bernie Madoff and stuff. And
some people they're just like, oh, well, it's legal, right? Like people are doing this, so like it has to be good, right? Like obviously I'm allowed to do this. And it's like, well, sometimes, first of all, you're not actually allowed to do the things that you do, but also, you know, like there are people who I think it's hard for people to fathom that someone could be so deceptive, that someone or it's not even deceptive, could have so much cognitive dissonance in doing stuff like that. That's hard for me to
Sometimes your own friends are so roped into something that they don't realize that what they're offering you could be harmful. I mean, hence where most religion comes from. Yeah. You know?
There's always, like, especially with the MLM stuff, there's always a friend. There's always like, oh, but my friend was telling me about this, or this someone that they got to know through these things that comes to trusted source. I've noticed that as a trend with a lot of these.
Well, and you'll see people who, you know, there's a phenomenon called faith healing homicide, where, you know, parents will deny their children life-saving medicine because they think that they have to, you know, use faith and pray, and that, you know, that they're doing their kid a service and that it's what God wants them to do. I don't think that those parents aren't loving parents. I think that they're extremely misguided and extremely misled. But you look at the look on their faces afterwards, and they're usually like just horrified.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
And so my goal is to catch people early before they get to that stage. But I don't think that most friends who are like, hey, like I've got something I can, you know, I think this is the best thing ever for you, and it's something that you know is harmful and damaging. I don't think that they're deliberately trying to hurt or deceive in most cases. Sometimes they are. And you have to be careful. But I think more often than not, people with good intentions buy into things on crappy evidence, and they end up hurting themselves or others.
Yeah, it sucks that we still have to deal with this, but it's what we have to do. And that's why, as a self-described skeptic, you have to be able to talk about this stuff in terms where both you and the other person can understand. I think we made an emphasis at this point of like, hey, like, talk to people with experience about this stuff. Talk to people who have also, you know, seen this stuff happen before. You gave a lot of great resources. There's so many ways to kind of tackle these problems, but hopefully we gave her enough advice to kind of go on from there. But
the cool thing is, even though the show's live, they can always rewind and check
true.
out. What did he mention?
The magic of the internet. Huh? It's really great. But let's go on to our next caller, shall we? This is Cleon, who is from Texas, and he wanted to talk to us about the utility of religion, even if it is not true. Cleon, am I saying your name right?
Yeah, hello?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey.
Yeah, you said it right.
Okay, sweet. Cool. So tell me more about this topic.
Yeah, so I'm I think like you guys, I think you guys are, but I'm also an atheist. Mm-hmm. But I'm in dialogue with a pastor at a local Baptist church, and he's pretty fundamental, you could say, and not that coherent in his arguments. But he asked me an interesting question. You know, he said if I had a button to erase religion right now, would I, you know, hit the button or flip the switch? And after giving it some thought, I was like, I don't think I would, you know, because so many people need it. I mean, what do you guys think about that question?
I know Thomas has some thoughts about this.
I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be more Socratic or if I'm supposed to...
you get to say your opinion straight up. Just go for it. Because I know what you think. We've already had conversations on this before off this program, and I know you have some strong opinions. So get it out there, man.
All right, I'll be blunt.
Yeah.
I think it's incredibly insulting to tell someone that they need religion, but you don't. I think to say, oh, you need a fantasy, you need a fairy tale, you need an invisible friend because you're not mature enough to be able to handle the real world. I think that that's incredibly insulting. I think that for some people, it is a crutch, but I think that there are much better alternatives that are actually real. And I have to harken back to Hitchens' challenge where, name one thing that is done in the name of religion that could not be done and that is not done by secular alternatives. And then, people have a hard time coming up with a single one. Like I have yet to hear one that was convincing. And then, the corollary of that is name one thing that's done by religion that is evil and horrific that, is only done by religion. And it's super easy. You think of things like the genital mutilation community is entirely religious. You think of the suicide bombing community. You think of people that will beat themselves as some form of penance and stuff. And that they're based on religious, motives. And there's so many different things. You have the Pope saying that condoms in AIDS-ridden parts of Africa are horrific and that they're not effective, and that they shouldn't use them. And you have people dying as a result of it. You have and I could go on about all the harm that's caused by religion. Yeah. But when it comes to the utility of it, yeah, there are some things I think that you could point to that, religion helped societies to come together. It helped us to form, bigger tribes based off of some bigger purpose or something. I don't think that that's needed anymore because we have alternatives. We have secular alternatives now, and the world is so interconnected now that as religion is dying off, we're actually finding that the places in the world that are the most peaceful are also the least religious, and they're the best places to live. So I really don't buy that for a second, that we need religion and that it's that some people just need to have it. And I have yet to see any evidence that, to the contrary, that would convince me. I'm happy to be convinced, but I have yet to see anything that is convincing.
Yeah, I don't think I need to add anything on to that. That was a great response.
Yeah, well, the reason why the question strikes me as interesting is because I was reading a book. It's called I think it's called "What Is Enlightenment." It's really like a summary of Kantian ethics and his morality and stuff. And it posits some of the arguments made against him and against Enlightenment values and secular values, and completely putting rationality at the forefront of your or how you perceive the world. And some of his challengers, not directly, but some of his challengers are like Hegel or like Edmund Burke, who are saying that maybe religion isn't really necessitated by its usefulness for the individual, but it's necessitated by its utility for a cohesive society, meaning that when people share really strong values, it creates a social bond and strengthens social contracts in a way that, after giving it some thought, I don't see how secular values could do that. Because,
I will give you the best counterexample I can possibly think of. Are you ready?
Okay.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I am doing this show right now at the atheist community of Austin. And what that means is a group of atheists who are able together, who feel the same way, who have the same secular values, came together, organized, started a nonprofit, able to put on shows like Truth Wanted and other great shows on this network that you should all totally watch. And
y'all do charity
we're here,
work,
like we're working. It's fine. The ACA has been around for 20 years now.
I would put forth another question, kind of from the flip side of things, and that's: do you really think that that level of, I would call it outright tribalism, that religion tends to lead to, do you think that that's beneficial to a society, not just to a society, but to a world, to be fragmented into not just one religion, but into hundreds of religions, especially where many of them are sitting one wet dream away from an apocalypse and with their fingers on a nuclear trigger?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. You know, it is a stupid idea good if it makes you feel happy, you know? And do too many stupid ideas endorse tribalism? Well, I was thinking about that, and yeah, it is tribalism, but tribalism isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, even if you have a whole bunch of different people believing different things for the same reasons, and it constructs cohesive societies that have the same values and are able to manifest themselves into something good, you could say. I don't see how that's necessarily a bad thing. And I think Thomas said it, I'm not sure, but he said this is a secular community, and I agree, and it's one that I support 100%. But to join this community, almost there isn't necessarily a right way to do it, but there is a better way to do it, which is this community is for people who really think about things and apply rationality and logic and actually, you know, interpret and perceive the world in a way that is consistent with science. And I think that's a lot harder to build, really, or to replace what religion has done in that people can accept religion without any any rational thinking. So Edmund Burke argues that people have prejudices, and that's a really powerful thing because, you know, a lot of times you can't rationalize your way into doing incredible acts of good for people, or you can't rationalize your way into doing stuff that will obviously endanger the lives of yourself or others, except if you have that irrational belief that, you know, I could go to heaven for this, or I could get 72 virgins, or whatever crazy idea you have. It can still permit you to do things that you would not otherwise do, given the ability to rationalize what you're
including
pretending.
horrific things.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too, because
people blow themselves up for 72 virgins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course.
You know, there's charities that are put forth by Hamas, but there's also charities that are put forth by non-terrorist organizations. You know, like Doctors Without Borders. You know,
yeah.
And so when I look at something like this, are you familiar with the expanding circle? It's a notion put forth by Peter Singer. It basically this concept is that we started off basically taking care of our kin, our immediate relatives, our family members, and then that extended to friends. And we wanted to be nice to friends, and whether it was through reciprocity or just building a society, that expanded to our tribes. And then our tribes got bigger.
Is this an altruistic argument where he is trying to argue for altruism and how we should because I'm familiar with Singer's arguments, but I'm not.
So it's based off of it's an argument for a secular form of morality, and it's not so much an argument for it. It's more of a way of explaining how societies have become more peaceful. Because if you read Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, he talks about how, and he demonstrates how societies have become more and more and more peaceful. That's just that those are the facts. That's what the data shows. And even in the 20th century with 2 world wars, we've been living in the most peaceful time in human history, if you really lay out the data. And one of the explanations for this is that society has been coming together. They've been, you start having higher literacy rates. People start reading, first-person accounts from someone else who's a different skin color, a different ethnicity, different, culture, and they're starting to be able to put themselves in this other person's shoes. You have borders starting to disappear and different nations trading with each other and realizing that, that trade is more advantageous than war. And so you have, this peaceful era of trading that comes on. You have democracy starting to spring up, and democracies are less likely to go to war with each other because it's less, advantageous. So all this stuff, we're building up not just one global community, one society, but we're doing it from a secular position without it doesn't need religion to come about. And we've actually seen religion declining as the world is becoming more cosmopolitan, more interconnected, more peaceful. You just go on the website Imager and you'll see like these pictures from, someone posting something in Japan or Korea, and you're like, oh my God, I saw the same show and I had the same reaction, the same memes. And there's like this connection that's happening where we're starting to realize that we're not so different from people, even if we're ethnically a little different, culturally a little bit different. We're becoming this big global community. And it's too late for that to really be reversed, because the internet has brought us all together. And, you can hop on a plane and end up on the other side of the world in 12 hours. And, so to me, I don't really see how we need religion to accomplish this. If anything, I see religion as cutting that expanding circle into pie pieces and saying, well, yeah, we're all the human race, but you're sinners and I'm not. You're going to hell and I'm not. And you're an infidel and I'm not. You're an apostate, I'm not. And invoking violence against people who are in those other camps.
Okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but so one of the other questions that the person I'm in dialogue would ask me is, if we were to, like, hypothetically, we were flip the switch and we were able to eradicate religion within seconds, no idea that it existed, how would the secular community even begin to construct their own moral system, or how would we? Because I don't find any of the you can't be good unless there's a God arguments substantiated at all, either philosophically or those. You can obviously be good without a God, pretty self-evident. But how does the secular community even go about creating? I don't want to use Jordan Peterson stories, but let's just use that. Like, how do we go about creating
narratives,
stories, and
narratives, right?
Myths.
How do we create rationalizations for ourselves? And I'll give you a few options, because I think there's more than one answer to this question. For myself, what I have done is I call myself a secular humanist. And I like reading humanist literature. I like seeing the news on that, because the narrative, if we're going to use those terms, is incredibly appealing to me. And it's something that I can rationalize. As you know, secular humanism has quite an interesting history as to how it came about and how it chooses to define itself, because it is kind of a principled system of ethics that's based on this idea that we don't have to be good with God, or we can be good without God, and that we choose to have rational, empirical evidence to base our beliefs. And somehow, I can't give you all the nitty-gritty details, but somehow it works. And somehow these humanist organizations continue to donate to charity every year. They continue to make self-sacrifices for causes that they believe in, because they were able to rationalize that. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you this is how you need to rationalize things, that humanism is the only way, but I am going to say that there are alternatives, even if it might not appeal to the same person at all times and at all places, because I don't think something like that actually exists. I think sometimes, situation ethics, this thing of like, oh no, this new thing has happened and this old principle we've applied doesn't work anymore. That seems to happen all the time, every day, but that doesn't mean we could just give up and say, oh, it's never going to happen, or we can't build a society off that. I think the one of the greatest things about being human is that we're able to adapt to our situations, that we're able to create new narratives, that we're able to continue living, because we can. Not to say that I don't believe there's a grand universal purpose to it all, but I do think that we as human beings who have already assigned values to things can use those values and use those narratives and use those stories that we create to do good things, whether or not it's always rational. But we can try to make it as rational as we can,
Well, and go ahead.
What I want to do is go ahead and disagree with one of Thomas's earlier points. He said he doesn't believe the claim that any particular person needs religion because they're not smart enough, or they're this or whatever. But I would disagree, because personally, I live in Houston, in a little city called Deer Park, and it's a pretty religious community, you could say. And most of the people I know are religious. My whole family is religious, but some people have been believing these stories and myths and legends for most of their life, if not the entirety. And when I try to have a discussion with them to try to, in a sense, enlighten them about their incoherent arguments for God or whatever they think, argument for personal experience or whatever, they begin to not break down, but they automatically assume that if I'm successful in my venture, then that leads to a nihilistic consequence immediately. And I don't think that you could ever persuade, however big the percentage is, or small, 30%, 40%, whatever it may be, I don't think you could ever convince some people that exist currently today, that their beliefs are wrong. And yeah, so I just wanted to disagree with Solom's first point.
I'm not saying that everyone can be convinced. And I'm not saying that for some people that it's not, a comfort, or that for some people they don't see it as a positive thing in their life. I understand that's the case. For me, it's more a matter of, I don't think that they have to have religion to get by in the long term. So the way that I'll kind of rephrase that is, yes, for some people, religion is a crutch. And sometimes when you have a broken leg, you need a crutch. But when a doctor comes in and he says, "Hey, look, you've got this condition, and I want to heal you, and I've got all the different proper meds that can heal you, for you to be okay," the patient might scream out and be like, "No, doctor, don't take this crutch away from me. I need it to walk. Otherwise, I would be, without hope, and I couldn't go anywhere." And the doctor says, "No, my goal is to heal you, and then when you're ready, you'll throw that crutch out on your own." And to me, it's not, we're not coming about it from a position of insensitivity and saying like, "Hey, you don't need that. You're stupid. Religion's just a crutch." Like, we're coming at it from a position of, "Hey, look, you've bought into this stuff. Maybe it gives you comfort. Maybe you don't necessarily understand, what the alternatives are to religion. Maybe you were like me before when I was religious and you thought, oh, without God, I won't have a purpose in life, and it takes time to realize, like, hey, one, there's not any evidence for this, but also I can have purpose. I can come up with my own purpose. I can find meaning in something that, in this life, and expanding this life, and extending human lifespan, and in the pleasures of life, and in the friendships and the family and the close loved ones, and really cultivating a better society for everyone, exploring the cosmos and learning about this universe like that. Those are things that I find deeply meaningful, deeply satisfying. And it's not top down. It doesn't require a slave master. It doesn't require groveling or prostrating myself on the ground before some, imaginary deity for me to have that purpose. And so to me, I want people to be free of that. I don't think that they need it, but that doesn't mean that they're not reliant on it right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you talk about meaning, but the position I take is that even if an idea is obviously false, or it takes a little bit of time to figure out it's false, even if it helps you, then I try not to engage in trying to rid you of that idea, because when I first became an atheist, that's something I was very, indulgent in doing. I did all the time. I couldn't believe what I had believed was so silly, I guess. So I tried to, convince people, hey, like, you should think about this stuff, but now it's much more sporadic in the sense that I think most people still, you don't say need, but I do. I think they still need it, because I personally know a few people that would, like I said, the only alternative for not believing in their specific deity is nihilism. Right off the bat, it's the next logical step. So, I think if you have a whole bunch of individuals that can't let go of a specific meaning because it gives them immense value, I think that's one positive to keep religion around. And then two, if you have a whole bunch of people that have shared values that gives them the same immense value, I think that's inexpendable. You just can't get rid of such an idea no matter how false it is. Because,
But you're telling us that as from a position of you've found a replacement, you've found an alternative, and
No,
the goal.
I haven't found a replacement nor alternative.
Oh, I thought you were saying that you had, but they hadn't.
No. I'm saying I wouldn't want to rid them of the ideas that they harbor. What I'm saying is, or my reason for that is because I don't see any moral philosophy or any value system that, you could get a whole bunch of people to subscribe to, because you need shared values for any cohesive society. So that's where I'm coming from.
Well, there's a lot there in that response that we could individually talk about. First, I want to talk about this idea of talking to other people and trying to convince them they're wrong. First off, I think that's a common atheist thing that happens. I think a lot of people who first identify as atheists, they want to tell the world about it and have these conversations, which is good and bad. I think it kind of gives a bad name sometimes because they're like, oh, these atheists, they talk about atheism all the time because, I don't know, they're bored or they're wrong.
Once you eat the cake, you want to share the cake.
That's a problem that happens. So I'm glad that you're kind of over that now. I have a show that I do every week where I talk about this stuff, and that's fun. And you know what? I have a regular job, and I go in just this week. I heard my Catholic coworker talk about how she had baptism for her infant this week, and I just said, yeah, that's great. That's awesome. So you're right in that. There's not always going to be times where your beliefs and your ability to correct people is appropriate. And
pick your battles too.
Yeah, that's something. I wish there was a great go-to heuristic for when's a good time and when's not time. I don't have one. I have my own ideas, but
it's like, when is it going to be most effective?
Yeah.
Like my dad started preaching at my grandmother's funeral, and my parents do missions work, and that wasn't the time or the place for me to, get on a soapbox.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously.
But at the same time, I'm not going to, when I'm one-on-one talking with my dad about this stuff, I'll tell him straight to his face, like, where I disagree with him, but I'm going to try to do it in an approachable, a kind, and a respectful way. Mm-hmm. I do reject one presupposition that you made, that you said when religion is helpful, or when it's a net positive, and I guess I see it as, you can say, like, it makes people feel better, it makes them feel happy or purposeful or something.
Well, that's not the main thing I'm worried about. It's what happens when a whole bunch of individuals that are affected by that specific value are able to come together and do things that they would have not otherwise been able to have rationalized themselves. And
you're worried that secular people can't do that, right?
I'm saying the secular community doesn't have a moral philosophy nor system that we can collectively sort of, build upon.
Oh, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly with you there that atheism in and of itself does not. Because atheism only answers one question. That's it.
Yeah.
It asks, do we believe in the existence of a God? And I say, without proof, no.
Yeah.
Beyond that, you got to start looking deeper. You have to look for, in this case, Dan was talking about secular humanism and trying to create a better society for humans. That's something that we all, care about. As far as secularism, really the only things that we group around with that is, we believe in separation of church and state. We don't want people legislating from the pulpit. We don't want, the Bible to dictate our laws, to have a theocracy.
We don't want Mike Pence being a vice president.
And we believe that you can be good without God.
Yeah.
Like, those three things, that's secularism. As far as the rest of it, you really have to start diving into moral philosophy. You do have options like rule utilitarianism. Trying to create the best society in the best number of cases. You sound like you're pretty well versed in philosophy, but I don't see how divine command theory really is an adequate replacement for any of that. If anything,
I think it is. Well, the reason why I think it is, because if you start with an idea predicated in being the most infallible thing in the universe, and you get a whole bunch of people to believe it, as religion has been successful at, I think you're able to construct the Western societies that we've seen. And I think that's the good side of the coin. But also, if you get a whole bunch of people that have slightly, of course, different varying beliefs about the divine command than you get other places like the Middle East or such. But I think yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah. So I had some other parts of my other response that I didn't get to earlier, but that's fine because I'm going to combine it kind of into this one thing, and specifically address this claim you make that Western civilization was a result of divine command theory in some way.
No, I think it was both. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I think it was both Enlightenment values.
Yes. Well, okay. So that was my first go-to is Enlightenment values and this idea of, again, humanism that was brought up in the 17th century. We're talking about, Renaissance, and even before that, honestly, if we're talking about, 14th century stuff with all kinds of great artists and people who found a way to make these great pieces of art and these great things of philosophy and stuff purely on the basis of human-centered values. I would say that, that is what made culture. That is what made our civilization. And again, this is kind of a historical counter-argument I'm trying to bring with you. But, I don't see how you don't have to... so, practically speaking, you're talking about, you're saying, infallibility kind of makes sense for people and motivates them to do more things, and I agree with that. And so I in a practical sense, I do treat my humanism as a kind of divine, shall I say, assignment for myself. Okay, and I use this kind of thinking because when I was a Christian and when I did do ministry and stuff, I had very similar values that I do now. Some of those things have changed, but for the most part, I thought that my position on being on this earth was to do good things, and I still try to hold that up today.
Yeah, of course.
So that hasn't really changed for me. But I did go through this phase of nihilism seems like it doesn't really do anything, and it doesn't. You're right. You can't build a society off of nihilism, and so I don't think that I don't think that's what you're arguing, but I do think that I was able to make that transition for myself on either the same values or the more values or change values from my days in ministry or my days in belief to my days of non-belief. And I've done that through, one, being here with the ACA, like we were talking about before, and doing the show and stuff, and meeting with people and talking with people. And I think there are lots of different ways people can build communities. Otherwise, the humanist society, the UK and America and the ACA and these organizations wouldn't come together unless that was possible. Are these unpopular ideas? Yes. Most people in the United States and otherwise don't agree with this right now, but that doesn't mean that their minds can't be changed. Islam and Christianity started off with a small group of people too, okay? And I'm sure they didn't see what would happen to the world that we see today. So I have a little more optimism. I would say that we can build these things, but we just have to have a little more. I'm not going to use the word faith, but I am going to say confidence in the evidence that we've seen that these things can happen.
Yeah. Well, I'm very much more pessimistic because I'm a hobbyist philosopher. So, but in the small works I read of Nietzsche, or I look at the failed. The failed tries of Kant's, I think it's called the categorical imperative, and I look at different philosophers at different times, atheist philosophers, of course, even Singer today, or Harris, or I look at their arguments on trying to do what you guys are saying, which is basically what I think you're saying. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that we can have a common value being that, hey, we're all human,
Mm-hmm.
So let's bond together on that. But I think that's just a false idea, and I think that's what Nietzsche realized, that as soon as you begin to say, okay, we're all humans and we need to work together, I think that just fails, because if you have an idea that can bond people, especially one that rewarded them for doing things that they would not have done otherwise because it would have killed them, I think that is always much better to have than to escape the, hey, we only live this once, so let's try to do our best, because
people do that for non-religious. I'll give you one example. People do that all the time for patriotism.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Well, these are all forms of tribalism that are shared around an idea or value, which I'm trying to assert is much more powerful than what humanism.
Well, I don't think it has to specifically be tribalistic, though. I think that it can be the entire human race, that it can be collective, and that you can have that level of investment that you see people who, they throw themselves on a grenade to save their comrades in the trenches. That type of selflessness, that human solidarity it's ubiquitously like present in human nature. We try to put together societies. If you get kicked out of a society, you will do anything to scrape and try to get back in. And part of it is evolutionarily ingrained in us, but I think that there's more to it. But when you look at going back to the Enlightenment, you look at the American Constitution, it is a secular document. These notions of separation of church and state, of freedom of speech, of putting the individual above sacred dogma, where suddenly you can question anything and there's no blasphemy laws and you're not going to be burned at the stake as a heretic. We're looking at, before that, hundreds of years where you had a history of, people being tortured in the Inquisition because, they didn't toe the religious line. You have things like the Crusades and stuff. And so, all of a sudden when there's the shift to, oh my God, the individual matters. Human life is valuable. It's not just that there's these religious dogmas that are sacred above all else that you have to uphold, where there's this shift in values. That wasn't a religious shift. That was a secular shift.
Yeah, well, that's what Burke argues against Kant, because Kant is saying the same thing. You are positing that individual values matter more than anything, and I would agree with you wholeheartedly. The individual should always be placed above the wishes and hopes of the collective. But I think you can't have a collective without having a whole bunch of individuals. And although the individual may obviously be more important and your interest should always be put before anybody else's, you could say, or you could, say it other ways to sugarcoat it. Even if you put an emphasis on individual values and you put the antithesis on, do this, and I'm just going to tell you to do it and you're going to listen to it because my dogma is the best thing ever. Dogma isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you have dogma or you have a dogmatic leader like a preacher or whatever you want to go with, if he's instilling a common value, I would still say that's better than the Enlightenment notion that the individual is more important than the collective. Because you could have a whole bunch of individuals that put huge emphasis on their individual rights and their whatever they want to call it, but as long as you have a group of people that believe the same thing for the same reason, is always going to be more important than individual rights. I think that's what Kant failed to realize.
Important, I'm not sure about. Effective, maybe, but important, that's a value judgment that I'm not really understanding how you're getting to. I think Thomas has made some really great points about the problems of dogmatism and.
I kind of want to get our definitions right. When we were talking about dogmatism, you said that you don't see it as a bad thing. When I think of dogmatism, I think of asserting something that cannot be questioned. That's like without evidence, or maybe on shoddy evidence, or just you don't question this, you just take it point blank. And I see that as extremely dangerous. I see it as utilized by every totalitarian regime ever, by every authoritarian religion ever. And I'm not sure I would agree with you there. But perhaps it might be a difference of definition.
No, we have the same definition of dogma. I'm just saying that while it may not be the best thing, arguably one of the worst things that you could use to manipulate X number of people, what I'm saying is it's still more effective than putting an emphasis on individual rights to achieve some collective goal.
But it wasn't the entire 20th century an exercise in that experiment where you had communistic societies that didn't value the individual, and then you had capitalistic ones that said, you know what, like, we'll see how a capitalistic economy fares by comparison, and the two competed toe to toe, and the result is overwhelmingly in favor of societies that allowed the individual to have self-determination and to seek the best for them and for their families.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, but so let me phrase it in light of what you just said. In individual values and rights matter, or individualism. But let me retract that. I don't see that as the correct. I don't know, because to me, you're talking about political theory and ethics and values, and I don't see how those two really
Well, they overlap.
Connection.
They overlap.
No.
One informs the other.
I would. How?
So your moral philosophy will inform your political theory.
Yeah, I don't see how.
For example, if your kind of primary values are, you care about, the collective, the community, society, that's what's most sacred to you, and the individual rights don't matter, then a communistic economic model and political model is going to be more appealing to you than an individual.
Yeah, I would say that doesn't make sense, and here's why. Because you could have you could put the emphasis on extreme individual rights. Your interest matters more than the existence of the universe itself, and still get communism, because you're saying, hey, individually we all deserve the same thing. Or you go the route you said and say, hey, it's all about society, it's all about the common good, so let's abolish the private corporations and redistribute the production and goods in this way. You get that conclusion irrespective of what your moral philosophy is.
I don't see how you're getting there at all. Like, literally the root of communism is like commune. It was like a collective of people, not an individual. The whole purpose of it was to have, these communities that were valued above the individual, and you would redistribute, you'd take from, everyone,
Yeah.
You take from them according to their means, and then you distribute according to people's needs. But it was a very collectively based society. It was not individualistic at all, and that's why you had, in almost every communistic society in the world, you had a kind of a disdain for the individual rights, and you had, whether it was the gulags or whether it was, basically assassinations of individuals or wiping out entire people groups that didn't toe the line. Like, there was a disdain for the individual, and it's I don't see, by definition, it was not an individualistic system.
Yeah, I see what you're saying now, and that makes sense. The ties to the political theory, I haven't really thought about, so I guess I'll think about that some more. But it was a great conversation, though.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. David, you brought to the conversation a level of literature and a level of sophistication to your argument and your thoughts, and I really appreciate that. That makes for a really great show. I think you articulated stuff well, and I'd love for you to call back again sometime if you want to talk about this again, if you've changed your mind a little bit, or if you want to talk to us on any of our various social medias and stuff. I'm sure we'd love to continue the conversation there, right?
Yeah. And honestly, I would say, like, with your friends and family and stuff, having this conversation, it's an ongoing thing. And, there may be points in their life when they're very reliant on religion, and there may be points when they're open and maybe they need a, kind of a helping hand to not just see whether or not something's true, but to see some positive alternatives. And hopefully there's a secular community near you that's doing some positive stuff. If not, there's a very vibrant online community. The ACA is doing a lot of stuff here, and we'd love to have you, take part and call back with other shows for sure.
All right. I'll take the advice.
Great. Thanks again for calling, David. Well, I think that about wraps up our show today, Thomas.
So in case you can't tell, as someone who lived in a former Soviet country, I am very much not a communist.
Yes. And I was going to bring this up if you weren't, but you do have an education in political science.
Yeah, well, my degree, I did a double major in international studies and Russian, but I had a political science concentration.
Yeah, so I mean, you are qualified in some ways to kind of talk about this a little bit, which is really cool. Which is like, like I've read things on the subject, but I can't nearly talk with the acuity that you have, which is really good.
And in this particular area, like I don't think it's an either or thing when it comes to value systems. I think it's more tiered. Mm-hmm. So in my case, sort of like the food pyramid, you might have, you need more more grains or less grains, or people will put however they stack it, but they'll have you need a little bit of this and a lot bit of this, and they prioritize based off of the values of what they want to consume. And it's the same way with our morals as to I care about community. I care about creating vibrant communities and societies and stuff, but I don't think that we get there by trampling on the individual. And I think that we have to hold the individual's value and rights above all else. And then when we have a society that values the individual, then we can build these vibrant, amazing communities and stuff. And I care about that as well. But I think it is tiered, and I think people just value different things differently.
Yeah, I do. And that's where most conflicts in society come from, isn't it? From the different tiers of values and how we organize that. This is the human condition right here wrapped up in this conversation. That's just, it's incredible the kinds of stuff that we talk about on the show. It's really amazing. Now, I mean, I was blown away by the level of talk that David had brought to the table. I mean, even though I disagree with him from the straight up, and he was asking about our opinion.
He definitely upped the intellectual discourse.
Yeah,
and I very much appreciate that.
I enjoy this, and I just love that I get to have conversations like that. It was really wonderful. But unfortunately, it's about that time, and we do have to wrap things up. So let me give you a few announcements before we plug our social media and tell you goodbye. Next week, we will not be having a show because next week is Thanksgiving weekend, and the people who help make this show deserve a little bit of a break. But don't worry, because we are still going to be giving you a show. I'm going to be giving you one of my earlier shows that I did back when this show was a test run and we didn't quite have a name. Actually, this was the last test show that we did before we went live. This was my conversation with Ocean. Some of you guys know who Ocean is. He is a pagan, and he was actually not just a caller on the show, but a guest host that I had, and we had some really interesting conversations there. We had good conversations with the people who are calling in, and we're going to be releasing that as an episode next week, so look forward to that. Of course, it won't be live because we won't be there, but the week after that, we'll be starting off again for a little bit there before the end of the year, so look forward to that. So I'm going to go ahead and plug my stuff first. So if you like this show, please subscribe. We also have a Patreon that you can give to. I do not take any of that money. All of that money goes to the ACA, and it helps improve shows like this and the other shows that are on this network. You can find me at ObjectivelyDan on Twitter, and I have a personal channel on YouTube, which is ObjectivelyDan as well. Also, be sure to plug into our Facebook page. That's the Truth Wanted Facebook page, and also check out some of the other shows that we have on here, like Talk Ethan and Atheist Experience and stuff, if you want to have conversations there. And we have a Discord for the atheist community of Austin as well, which you should definitely get plugged into. Thomas Westbrook, how can people find you?
So my channel is called HolyKoolaid, and I am on Twitter at HolyKoolaid, Facebook /HolyKoolaid, and HolyKoolaid.com. And my podcast is called The Here and How, as in, how did this happen? So go check that out. And right now, real quick, we're it looks like 28 people watching, 6 likes. Let's see if we can get that like up to 28. So smash that like button, share this with your friends.
He did the thing, guys. He did the YouTuber thing.
I just hit like on my phone, so I'm not a hypocrite.
There you go. All right. Well, that about wraps up for another great, fantastic, wonderful episode of Truth Wanted. Thanks again, guys, for tuning in. And remember, always keep wanting the truth. We'll see you next time.